The Whispering Shadows. There's a small, forgotten village in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains called Black Hollow. For decades, no one dared to move into the old manor at the edge of the forest, known as Whispering Shadows Estate. The locals spoke of cursed ground, a place where the dead did not rest, and where whispers could be heard every night, calling out names. The legend. The story begins in the early 1800s when the estate was owned by the enigmatic Dr. Elias Greaves, a reclusive figure who claimed to be conducting experiments on life and death. Townsfolk noticed strange lights emanating from the windows at odd hours, and animals began disappearing. Then, the people of Black Hollow started vanishing one by one. Dr. Greaves disappeared without a trace one stormy night, and his mansion was abandoned. However, the whispers started shortly after, a low, chilling sound that echoed through the forest. "Leave or suffer," it would murmur, but no one could trace the voice. The present. Years later, a young documentary filmmaker named Rachel Carter stumbled upon stories of the haunted estate. She had built her career debunking urban legends and ghost stories, and saw Black Hollow as her next big break. Armed with her camera and skepticism, she moved into the estate with her crew, determined to uncover the truth behind the whispers. The haunting. The first night seemed uneventful. The team set up their equipment, joked about the eerie atmosphere, and dismissed the villagers' warnings as superstition. But as the clock struck midnight, the whispers began. "Who's there?" Rachel whispered back, her voice shaky but curious. The whispers grew louder, swirling around her like an invisible storm, uttering her name. "Rachel, leave while you can." Terrified, she turned to her crew, but they were staring blankly at the walls, entranced by shadowy figures moving across them. It wasn't long before one of them screamed, collapsing to the floor. The team found a series of cryptic journals hidden in the basement. The writings revealed Dr. Greaves had been experimenting with summoning spirits, binding them to the estate to achieve immortality. But the rituals went horribly wrong. The spirits rebelled, trapping not only Greaves but anyone who dared to trespass. The descent into madness. As the nights passed, Rachel and her crew faced relentless torment. The shadows grew corporeal, taking the forms of lost villagers, their faces twisted in agony. Equipment malfunctioned, doors slammed shut, and blood-red writing appeared on the walls. "You can't leave." Rachel discovered that the only way to end the curse was to destroy the artifacts Greaves used for his rituals, hidden deep in a secret chamber beneath the mansion. But the spirits wouldn't let her. One by one, her crew members succumbed to the haunting, disappearing into the shadows or losing their sanity. Rachel, now alone, ventured into the hidden chamber, finding a grotesque altar surrounded by skeletons. The whispers became deafening as she smashed the artifacts, hoping to free the trapped souls. The twist. As the final artifact shattered, the spirits let out an ear-piercing scream and vanished. For a brief moment, the house grew silent, and Rachel thought she had won. But as she turned to leave, the whispers returned, this time louder and angrier. The spirits hadn't been freed. They had been waiting for a new vessel. The camera she had been holding continued recording as her screams filled the air, capturing her transformation into the newest shadow of Whispering Shadows Estate. The legacy. Weeks later, Rachel's footage was found in the forest by hikers, but her body was never recovered. The video went viral, sparking debates and attracting thrill-seekers to the haunted estate. They, too, were never seen again. The legend of Whispering Shadows Estate lives on, and if you listen closely on a quiet night, you might hear Rachel's voice whispering, "Don't come here. Leave while you can." The Lantern Keeper. In the heart of a sprawling, mist-covered marshland, there stood an abandoned lighthouse known as the Hollow Lantern. It hadn't guided ships for over a century, its light extinguished after a tragedy that no one in the nearby town of Blackmere dared to discuss. Some claimed it was cursed. Others swore they had seen a flickering light from the tower late at night, despite its derelict state. The legend. In 1892, the lighthouse keeper, Samuel Grady, was known for his obsessive dedication. He lived alone, manning the light and keeping sailors safe from the treacherous waters. But one stormy night, Samuel failed to light the lantern. A ship carrying 50 passengers smashed against the rocks, and every soul aboard was lost. When a search party arrived at the lighthouse, they found no trace of Samuel, only bloody handprints on the walls, a shattered lantern, and a journal with the chilling final entry: "The light must never go out, or they will come." The present. Decades passed, and the lighthouse became a local legend. A group of college friends, intrigued by ghost stories, decided to explore the lighthouse for their paranormal podcast, Beyond the Veil. They were eager for content, and the rumors of Samuel's ghostly figure carrying a lantern in the fog were too good to resist. The group consisted of Mia, the skeptical host; Liam, the tech enthusiast; Nina, the believer in all things paranormal; Jack, the thrill seeker. The arrival. The friends arrived at Blackmere as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows over the marshes. Locals warned them to stay away, muttering about the Lantern Keeper and how those who ventured to the lighthouse never returned. Undeterred, they set out with flashlights, cameras, and recording equipment. The path to the lighthouse was treacherous, surrounded by stagnant waters that seemed to breathe in the cold night air. Strange sounds, whispers, footsteps, and the faint clinking of chains echoed around them. The haunting. Upon entering the lighthouse, the group felt an oppressive presence. The air was thick, and the faint smell of salt and decay filled their lungs. The walls were etched with scratches, as if someone, or something, had clawed at them in desperation. Liam set up his equipment and noticed strange interference. The static resolved into a voice: "Keep the light on, or they will come." Mia dismissed it as a trick of the old wiring, but Nina insisted it was a warning. Jack, eager to prove his bravery, climbed to the top of the lighthouse to relight the lantern, joking about bringing Samuel back to life. As the lantern flickered to life, a deafening wail erupted, shaking the tower. The fog outside thickened unnaturally, and shadowy figures began to emerge, dripping, skeletal shapes with hollow eyes. The Lantern Keeper returns. Samuel's ghost appeared, clutching his lantern with trembling hands. His face was gaunt, his eyes wide with eternal fear. "You shouldn't have lit it," he rasped. The group froze as the shadowy figures began clawing at the windows, their moans echoing in their ears. Samuel turned to them, his voice rising in desperation. "The light is their beacon. It calls them. You've doomed us all." The group tried to flee, but the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The shadows seeped through the walls, circling them like predators. One by one, the friends were dragged into the darkness, their screams swallowed by the fog. The final survivor, Mia, the last remaining, stumbled to the top of the tower. Desperately, she smashed the lantern, extinguishing the light. The wailing stopped, and the shadows receded, but Samuel's ghost remained. "You think you've ended it," he whispered, his face twisting into a malicious grin. "The light always comes back, and so will they." The aftermath. Days later, locals found the group's abandoned gear outside the lighthouse. The recordings captured the terrifying events, including Samuel's chilling words. The podcast episode went viral, sparking debates about whether it was an elaborate hoax or proof of the supernatural. But those who ventured to the lighthouse after hearing the story never returned. On foggy nights, sailors still report seeing a faint light flickering from the hollow lantern and hearing distant, anguished screams carried by the wind. The legend of the Lantern Keeper lives on, a story too terrifying to ignore and too dangerous to investigate.
Nestled deep in the countryside of Eldermore was an ancient well, long since sealed and hidden beneath a thicket of brambles and moss. Locals whispered about its cursed origins, a well that didn't give water but instead took what it wanted: souls. They called it the Black Maw, and for centuries, it was avoided by all except the reckless and the doomed. The legend. The story goes back to the 17th century when the village suffered a terrible drought. Crops withered, livestock died, and families faced starvation. Desperate for a solution, they turned to Agatha Moore, an outcast healer rumored to dabble in witchcraft. Agatha promised rain in exchange for a sacrifice, a child's life. The villagers, driven by desperation, agreed and offered her the blacksmith's only son. Agatha led the boy to the well and cast a forbidden ritual, summoning rain that saved the village. But as the rain fell, so did a curse. Agatha warned the villagers. The well is alive now, and it hungers. You must feed it, or it will take from you. For years, the villagers kept the well sated, throwing livestock and criminals into its depths. But when they failed to offer sacrifices, children began vanishing in the night, their cries echoing from the well. Overwhelmed by guilt, the villagers sealed the well with heavy stones and vowed never to speak of it again. The present. 3 centuries later, the well became a forgotten relic of history. That was until Alex Turner, a paranormal investigator with a failing YouTube channel, stumbled across the legend. Alex was desperate for content to revive his career. Joined by his girlfriend Emily, his tech-savvy brother Josh, and their skeptical friend Lisa, Alex set out to uncover the truth. The expedition? The group arrived in Eldermore, their equipment packed with night vision cameras, EVP recorders, and drones. The villagers were wary, warning them to leave the well alone, but Alex brushed off their concerns as superstition. They found the well after hours of hacking through the overgrown forest. The stones sealing it were covered in strange symbols, weathered by time but still unsettling. The air grew colder as they approached, and a faint sound echoed from the depths, a low, guttural whisper. Alex, eager to capture footage, removed the stones despite Emily's protests. As the last stone was pried loose, a rush of icy wind erupted from the well, carrying a foul stench. The descent into madness. That night, strange things began to happen. Emily heard her name whispered from the trees. Josh's drone malfunctioned, crashing into the forest. When they retrieved it, the footage showed fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures moving unnaturally fast. Lisa woke to find claw-like scratches on her arms, though she swore she hadn't left her tent. Despite the growing unease, Alex pressed on, lowering a camera into the well the next day. The screen showed only darkness at first, but as the camera descended, something moved, a pale, skeletal hand reaching out before the feed abruptly cut off. That night, the whispers grew louder, coming not just from the well but from everywhere. The group saw figures in the shadows, emaciated children with hollow eyes, their mouths frozen and silent screams. The ritual. Desperate to escape, Emily confronted Alex, blaming his arrogance for their predicament. But Alex, now obsessed, revealed an ancient journal he had found near the well. It detailed a ritual to seal the well again, requiring a blood offering. Lisa refused to participate, accusing Alex of being reckless. She stormed off, but minutes later, her screams echoed through the forest. The group found her body by the well, her face twisted in terror, her lifeless eyes staring into the abyss. The final sacrifice. Determined to end the nightmare, Alex prepared the ritual, using Lisa's blood as the offering. But the well rejected it, shaking violently as a monstrous entity emerged, a grotesque amalgamation of the souls it had consumed. The creature spoke in 1,000 voices, each filled with rage. "You cannot silence me. I will never be full." It lunged at Alex, pulling him into the well. Emily and Josh fled, but as they reached the edge of the forest, Emily tripped. Turning back to help her, Josh saw the shadowy children dragging her away, their whispers drowning out her screams. The aftermath. Josh escaped alone, the only survivor. His footage became a viral sensation, but he was haunted by nightmares of the well and its whispers. No one believed his story, dismissing it as an elaborate hoax. Months later, hikers discovered a new stone sealing the well, but fresh claw marks marred its surface. And on certain nights, villagers swore they could still hear Emily's voice, begging for help, as the whispers of the Black Maw called out for its next victim. The legend of the Forgotten Well remains, a chilling tale of greed, desperation, and the insatiable hunger of a darkness that can never be filled. The House on Hollow Hill. The beginning. On the outskirts of Ravenwood, a small town shrouded in mist, stood a decrepit old house known as the Hollow Hill Manor. The house was infamous for its unsettling past, a place where strange, unexplainable events had plagued the lives of anyone who dared to live there. The last known occupants, the Whitlock family, vanished without a trace nearly 50 years ago. Since then, the house remained abandoned, its broken windows and rotting wood glaring at the world like a forgotten relic of despair. Locals claimed that the house was alive, that it could feel you, and that something within its walls thrived on fear. The phenomenon. One cold autumn evening, a group of paranormal enthusiasts led by Elliot Grayson, a retired investigator, decided to document the stories surrounding the house. The team included Maya, a psychic sensitive to spiritual energies; Owen, a tech expert armed with the latest paranormal gear; Harper, a historian fascinated by the manor's lore; Jamie, a skeptic who believed the phenomenon could be explained scientifically. As they approached the house, the air grew thick, and an unnatural silence blanketed the area. Even the forest surrounding the hills seemed to shrink away, as if recoiling from the sinister presence of the manor. The team noticed something strange immediately. The house appeared larger than it should, with impossible angles and windows that seemed to shift positions when no one was looking. The event. The group set up their equipment in the sprawling, dust-covered living room. Cameras, EMF readers, and thermal sensors began recording. The first few hours were uneventful, but as the clock struck midnight, everything changed. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, shaking the floorboards. The chandelier above their heads began to sway, even though there was no breeze. Maya gasped, clutching her chest. "Something is here, watching us." The temperature plummeted, and their breath became visible. The hum turned into whispers, faint and indistinct at first, but growing louder. The voices seemed to emanate from the walls, overlapping in a cacophony of despair. Harper deciphered one phrase, repeated over and over. "Help us, don't let it out." The entity. Suddenly, Owen's thermal camera detected movement, a figure in the corner of the room, where no one was standing. The figure was cold, unnaturally so, and seemed to be crawling along the walls. As the team stared, a shadow began to materialize, a tall, spindly creature with hollow eyes that seemed to absorb the light around them. The whispers grew to a deafening roar. The creature opened its mouth, revealing rows of jagged, glass-like teeth, and let out an inhuman screech. The room shook violently, and the walls began to bleed a dark, viscous liquid. Maya screamed, falling to the floor. Through her tears, she choked out, "It's not just a ghost. It's ancient. It feeds on the living." The revelation. Harper, flipping through old documents they'd brought, uncovered a shocking detail. The house was built on the site of an execution ground from the 1700s. Dozens of accused witches were hanged and buried there, their deaths cursed by a pact to summon something unspeakable, a protector that had turned into their eternal jailer. But the pact had a flaw. If the house was disturbed, the entity could grow stronger, potentially breaking free. "We need to leave!" Jamie shouted. "No," Maya replied, her voice trembling. "If we leave now, it will follow us." The confrontation. The team decided to confront the entity, using a protection ritual Maya knew. They set up a circle of salt and lit candles around an old symbol carved into the floor. As Maya chanted, the entity grew more aggressive, slamming doors and throwing objects across the room. The candles flickered violently, and the creature lunged at them, its form flickering between solid and shadow. The air crackled with energy as the ritual reached its peak. "Begone!" Maya shouted, throwing a handful of salt into the air. The entity let out an ear-splitting wail and collapsed into a pool of darkness that seeped back into the floor. For a moment, the house was silent, but the team knew it wasn't over. The twist. As they gathered their equipment to leave, Owen noticed the footage they'd captured was distorted. The entity's face appeared in every frame, staring directly at the camera, as if it knew they would try to expose its existence. The group hurried outside, but as they reached the edge of the property, they saw the manor's front door slam shut on its own. A single candle flickered in an upstairs window, and a low hum began to rise again. Maya turned pale. "We didn't banish it. We just woke it up." The aftermath. The footage was uploaded to Elliot's channel and quickly went viral, sparking debates and attracting more thrill-seekers to Hollow Hill Manor. But each new visitor reported terrifying encounters, and some never returned at all. Now, the house sits in eerie silence, a beacon for those curious or foolish enough to challenge the darkness within. But every so often, on a quiet night, the hum can be heard from miles away, a warning, or perhaps an invitation, from the malevolent force that still waits in the shadows.
The Lantern Keeper. Prologue. In the quiet village of Brackenwood, nestled at the edge of a sprawling forest, an old legend had persisted for generations. The villagers spoke in hushed tones about a shadowy figure known as the Lantern Keeper, who wandered the forest paths on moonless nights. According to the tales, his lantern didn't illuminate the way. It led lost souls deeper into the darkness. The Lantern Keeper was said to have once been a kindly woodsman, but a terrible betrayal had cursed him to roam the forest forever, collecting the souls of those foolish enough to follow his light. The Invitation. One rainy October evening, a group of 5 friends, Clara, Ethan, Mia, Jordan, and Sam, decided to test the legend. They were city kids visiting Brackenwood for a weekend getaway, bored and eager for adventure. The forest was strictly off-limits at night, but that only made it more appealing. Clara, the leader of the group, suggested they search for the Lantern Keeper. Armed with flashlights and a sense of invincibility, they ventured into the woods. The first encounter. The forest was unnervingly quiet, the only sounds being the rustling of leaves and the occasional crack of a branch beneath their feet. After an hour of wandering, Ethan spotted something in the distance, a faint, flickering light. "That's it," he whispered excitedly. The group followed the light, their flashlights barely piercing the thick darkness. As they drew closer, the light revealed itself to be a lantern swaying gently in the air, seemingly suspended by nothing. Standing beneath it was a figure dressed in tattered, soot-covered clothes. His face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, and his free hand rested on a long wooden staff. The Lantern Keeper didn't speak. He simply turned and began walking deeper into the forest, the lantern's light beckoning them to follow. The warnings. Mia hesitated, pulling Clara back. "This feels wrong. We should go back." But Clara laughed it off. "It's just some old guy playing a trick. Come on." As they followed the Lantern Keeper, the forest seemed to shift around them. Familiar landmarks disappeared, and the path became more treacherous, twisting in unnatural ways. Jordan, who had been lagging behind, suddenly stopped. "Do you hear that?" he asked. A low, mournful wail echoed through the trees, sending chills down their spines. The group huddled together, but the Lantern Keeper continued without pause. "Maybe it's part of the legend," Sam suggested nervously. The first disappearance. They reached a clearing where the Lantern Keeper stopped and raised his lantern high. The light flared brightly, illuminating dozens of shadowy figures standing at the edge of the clearing. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly, and their mouths hung open as if screaming silently. Ethan took a step back. "What the hell is this?" Before anyone could react, the Lantern Keeper turned to Jordan, who froze as if rooted to the ground. The shadowy figures surged forward, dragging him away into the darkness. His screams were cut off abruptly, leaving only silence. The descent. Panic set in. "We need to leave," Mia shouted, but the forest wouldn't let them. Every path they tried led them back to the clearing, where the Lantern Keeper stood, waiting. Clara finally snapped. "What do you want?" she screamed at the figure. For the first time, the Lantern Keeper spoke, his voice like wind through dead leaves. "Payment." The group realized the truth. They had trespassed, and now the forest demanded its due. The bargain. Desperate, Clara offered herself, hoping to save the others. The Lantern Keeper tilted his head as if considering her offer, then raised his lantern again. The light engulfed Clara, and when it faded, she was gone. In her place stood another shadowy figure at the edge of the clearing, its face twisted in agony. The remaining 3 ran blindly through the forest, no longer caring where they went. The trees seemed to close in around them, and the air grew heavy with whispers. The escape. By some miracle, they stumbled onto the road leading back to Brackenwood. As they collapsed onto the pavement, the forest behind them grew still. The 3 survivors, Ethan, Mia, and Sam, left the village the next day, swearing never to speak of what had happened. But the experience left them scarred. Ethan claimed to see flickering lantern lights outside his window at night. Mia dreamed of Clara, standing silently in the shadows. The twist. Years later, Sam returned to Brackenwood, unable to resist the pull of the forest. Locals claimed they saw him walking into the woods one moonless night, following a faint, flickering light. He was never seen again. And so, the Lantern Keeper's legend grew, his collection of lost souls ever expanding, as he wandered the forest with his cursed lantern, waiting for the next group of the curious, the foolish or the doomed. The Curse of Blackwater Gorge. The legend. Deep within the Appalachian Mountains lies Blackwater Gorge, a winding river gorge shrouded in mist and mystery. Locals tell stories of eerie screams that echo through the canyon on moonless nights, claiming they come from the spirits of those who drowned in the river's treacherous rapids. But one tale stands out above the rest. The legend of the drowned woman, a vengeful spirit said to lure unsuspecting victims to their watery graves. According to the story, she was a widow who lost her husband in the gorge decades ago. In her grief, she waded into the river, calling out to him until the currents pulled her under. Her spirit, fueled by sorrow and rage, is said to haunt the waters, forever searching for her lost love. The expedition. One summer, a group of 5 friends, Rachel, Eric, Lena, Chris, and David, decided to explore Blackwater Gorge. They were avid adventurers, drawn by the beauty of the rugged cliffs and the challenge of navigating the river's notorious currents. The trip started innocently enough. They paddled their canoes down the river, marveling at the towering cliffs and dense forests surrounding them. Rachel, the group's leader, dismissed the warnings from the locals as superstition. As the sun set on their first day, the river grew eerily calm. A thick fog rolled in, and the air grew unnaturally cold. "Looks like we're in for a spooky night," Chris joked, but his laugh felt hollow in the silence. The first omen. That night, as they sat around their campfire, a strange sound interrupted their laughter, a faint, mournful singing coming from the river. "Do you hear that?" Lena whispered, her face pale. The group fell silent, straining to hear. The melody was haunting, like a lullaby sung by someone on the brink of despair. "It's probably just the wind," Rachel said, though her voice wavered. But the singing grew louder, closer. It seemed to echo from the cliffs and the water simultaneously. David shined his flashlight toward the river, but the beam was swallowed by the fog. "We should stay away from the water tonight," Eric said, his unease spreading through the group. The disappearance. The next morning, Chris was gone. His sleeping bag lay empty, his belongings undisturbed. The group searched frantically, calling his name, but the only answer was the sound of rushing water. When they reached the riverbank, they found footprints leading into the water, and nothing else. Lena screamed, convinced that the drowned woman had taken him. Rachel tried to stay rational. "Maybe he went for a swim and got lost. We need to search upstream." But Eric shook his head. "No one swims in Blackwater. The currents are too strong." The haunting intensifies. As they continued downstream, strange things began to happen. Shadows moved along the cliffs, and the mournful singing returned, louder and more insistent. Lena swore she saw a pale figure standing in the river, beckoning to her. That night, they camped further from the water, but the singing followed them. David, unable to sleep, wandered into the woods and didn't return. When the others went searching for him, they found his flashlight lying in a pool of muddy water. The ground around it was soaked, though it hadn't rained. "This place isn't natural," Eric said. "We need to leave." But the river seemed to conspire against them. The currents grew stronger, and the fog thickened, obscuring the way out. The confrontation. On the third night, Rachel woke to find Lena standing at the edge of the river, her arms outstretched. The water swirled around her feet, unnaturally calm. "Lena, stop!" Rachel shouted, but Lena turned slowly, her eyes blank. "She says he's here," Lena whispered. "She says Chris is waiting for us in the water." Before Rachel could reach her, Lena stepped into the river. The currents rose violently, dragging her under in seconds. Rachel and Eric were now the only ones left. They stayed awake all night, huddled together, the singing and whispers surrounding them. The escape. At dawn, they made a desperate attempt to paddle out of the gorge. The river fought them at every turn, waves crashing against their canoe as if the water itself was alive. As they neared the mouth of the gorge, Rachel looked back and froze. Standing on the riverbank was a woman in a tattered dress, her face obscured by dripping, matted hair. In her hands, she held an old, waterlogged lantern. The woman raised her head, revealing hollow, black eyes. She opened her mouth, and the mournful singing began again, deafening and all-encompassing. Rachel screamed as the canoe capsized, plunging them into the icy water. The aftermath. Weeks later, search parties found Rachel clinging to a tree on the riverbank, delirious and dehydrated. She was the only survivor. Rachel refused to speak about what had happened, but locals noticed a change in her. She avoided the river at all costs, and her once bright eyes seemed dull, as if haunted by something she couldn't escape. One night, an old fisherman claimed to see Rachel standing at the edge of Blackwater Gorge, staring into the rapids. The next morning, her body was found floating in the river, a faint smile on her lips. The legend of the drowned woman lives on, her mournful song echoing through the gorge, luring new souls to join her eternal vigil beneath the waters. And once you hear her call, there is no turning back. The Whispering Church. The Forgotten Chapel. In a remote countryside town stood St. Hallow's Chapel, an ancient stone church abandoned for over a century. The townsfolk avoided it at all costs, warning anyone who dared to approach. The chapel's crumbling steeple and shattered stained-glass windows loomed ominously against the skyline. The church's eerie reputation stemmed from an unspeakable event. The congregation mysteriously disappeared during a midnight service over 150 years ago. Only the priest, Father Aldrich, remained, found kneeling at the altar, his eyes wide with terror and his mouth stitched shut with black thread. Over the years, strange occurrences plagued those who ventured near. Whispers carried on the wind, flickering candlelight in the windows, and shadowy figures seen moving behind the warped wooden doors. Locals dubbed it the Whispering Church, claiming the voices of the lost congregation still lingered, desperate for salvation. The Dare. One stormy October night, 4 college friends, Anna, Ryan, Jess, and Tom, decided to explore the church. They were staying in the nearby town for a photography project, and the spooky old chapel seemed like the perfect subject. Anna, the fearless leader, dismissed the warnings as small-town superstition. Jess, nervous but unwilling to be left behind, reluctantly agreed. Ryan and Tom, eager for a thrill, brought flashlights, cameras, and a Ouija board for added fun. The discovery. The group arrived just as lightning split the sky. The church's heavy wooden door creaked open as if welcoming them inside. Dust motes danced in the beam of their flashlights, revealing rows of decaying pews, a collapsed pulpit, and the faint scent of damp stone. As they explored, they noticed odd carvings on the walls, symbols and Latin phrases etched deep into the stone. Ryan snapped photos while Anna read aloud, "Salva nos ex tenebris." Deliver us from the darkness. The words echoed unnaturally, as if the church itself were repeating them. At the back of the church, they discovered a trapdoor hidden beneath a tattered rug. Tom, grinning, pulled it open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling into the earth. "This is where the real fun begins," he said, descending without hesitation. The crypt. The air grew colder as they entered the crypt. The walls were lined with ancient, crumbling coffins, and a large stone altar stood at the center of the room. Candles, though unlit, appeared freshly placed, and the faint scent of incense lingered. Jess shivered. "We shouldn't be here." Anna rolled her eyes. "It's just an old crypt. What's the worst that could happen?" Ryan set up the Ouija board on the altar, daring the others to join him. Reluctantly, they placed their fingers on the planchette. "Is anyone here with us?" Anna asked, her voice steady. At first, nothing happened. Then the planchette moved, slowly but deliberately, spelling out LEAV. The group exchanged nervous glances. Ryan, thinking it was a joke, laughed. "Come on, who's pushing it?" The candles around the crypt flared to life, bathing the room in an unnatural red glow. The whispers began, faint at first but growing louder, dozens of voices speaking over one another in an unintelligible cacophony. The haunting. The trapdoor slammed shut above them, and the temperature plummeted. A shadowy figure materialized near the altar, its form twisting and writhing as if it were made of smoke. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, deep and resonant. "Why have you come?" Jess screamed, bolting for the stairs, but the shadow blocked her path. It stretched out an arm, and she collapsed, gasping for breath as invisible hands seemed to choke her. Tom and Ryan tried to pull her back, but the shadow expanded, enveloping the room in darkness. Anna, clutching a flashlight, shone its beam on the figure. For a moment, it recoiled, and she saw its face, hollow eyes and a mouth sewn shut with black thread, just like Father Aldrich. "We're sorry," Anna cried. "We didn't mean to disturb you." The shadow paused, its stitched mouth tearing open to reveal rows of jagged teeth. It spoke again, its voice shaking the walls. "Confess." The confession. Terrified, Anna knelt at the altar, babbling an apology. Ryan and Tom followed suit, dragging Jess with them. The whispers intensified, their words becoming clear. "Save us. Free us. Deliver us from the darkness." Realizing the spirits were trapped, Anna grabbed a nearby candle and used her lighter to ignite it. The flame burned brightly, its light pushing back the shadow. She whispered a prayer, repeating the Latin phrase from the church walls. "Salva nos ex tenebris." The shadow shrieked, its form unraveling as the light consumed it. The whispers faded, replaced by a profound silence. The escape. The trapdoor creaked open, and the group fled, leaving their equipment behind. They didn't stop running until they reached their car, drenched in sweat and shaking with fear. When they returned to town, they told the locals what had happened. An old priest nodded solemnly. "You were lucky," he said. "The church was cursed, but you may have lifted the burden. The souls trapped there, perhaps they are finally at peace." The twist. The friends vowed never to return, but strange things began happening to them. Ryan's photographs showed figures that hadn't been there before. Jess heard whispers in her home at night. Anna dreamed of the shadowy figure, its hollow eyes staring into her soul. Months later, the church was found burned to the ground, though no one could explain how it happened. The villagers believed it was the spirit's final act, destroying the place of their torment. But some claim the whispers didn't vanish. They simply moved. Visitors to the area report hearing faint voices carried on the wind, calling them back to the whispering church, even though it no longer stands.